Hi, Kelly King.
Hi, Jay Fidell.
Thank you for coming down. It's great to have you here. And through you, I have a greater appreciation of Maui than ever.
Oh, thank you. That's very
I'm
flattering.
studying Maui, and you're definitely the Maui phenomenon and energy. So let's catch up with you, okay?
Okay.
What's happening, for example, on the biofuel facilities credit bill? Because there was some discussion of that in the I guess it was the briefing with the chairs of the two. It was the Energy Policy Forum briefing maybe a month ago. What's going to happen? What is happening?
Well, what's happening now is it's on a short list of bills to be fast-tracked because last session it made it all the way through to conference committee, and then, as you know, the House and the Senate had some disagreements about some things, and one of them left early.
But it was the good thing. You know, I keep hearing that about so many bills. It wasn't personal. Well, maybe it was personal, but it wasn't substantive.
No,
you know?
It wasn't a personal thing. It was just something that they had differences in some other areas about things that had happened between the Senate and the House, and
So everything got train wrecked
so
all
they
at the
went
same
home
time.
early. You know, those of us who were watching on TV diligently, thinking, "Oh, this is going to go till midnight at 6:00." They went home. We went, "Wait, our bills aren't passed
So
yet."
nobody was really out there trying to torpedo this bill. It's just that everything got torpedoed.
Yeah, I think a lot of things did, and certainly there were some forces working against it, but that wasn't why it didn't go through. I mean, you don't get anything worthwhile passed without facing some opposition.
Isn't that true? That's so in every single area you can think of.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a fight, it wasn't worth it.
That's right. That's one of the reasons why Willie Nelson says that when his wife got her first biodiesel car, he was very skeptical. He said he thought she needed some opposition to it so she could prove she was right.
Smart woman. He needs her.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's take a segue on that. I know you have a relationship with Willie Nelson, and I'm envious of that because he's one of my favorite guys.
Oh, he's a great guy.
So tell us, how did you cross paths with him? What's he doing with you?
Well, they found us. They have a home on Maui, and they have a home on Maui as well as their ranch in Texas. And they actually, I was through Annie seeing an article about Pacific Biodiesel in one of the local papers on Maui, and she went out and got herself a diesel Jetta and came in and Willie always likes to say that he thought maybe she got into some of his stash and she's going to run her car on vegetable oil. But, after it ran perfectly for about 6 months, he went and got himself a diesel Mercedes, and, so they
Want to show her up?
Yeah. So, they have, I think, 4 or 5 vehicles at their house because they have, they have kids and housekeepers and things, and everybody runs on biodiesel now. But he's actually, they, as individually and as a couple, have become partners with us in the biodiesel plant in Oregon that we own and operate. We have other investors, but we are invested in that. We operate it. They actually have a small stake in Big Island Biodiesel, and then they have a pretty large stake in the Texas biodiesel plant that we built.
It sounds like he really believes in it. He's not doing this just for business.
No, he believes in it totally.
Yeah, well, that's great to have
It's
him on board.
Good support, and one of the things that we never thought we'd see was truck drivers driving on biodiesel because they're so intensely aware of every half penny of fuel increase or decrease. And at the time that the truck drivers started trying biodiesel, it was a couple cents more. But Willie has a show on Wednesdays on XM Radio, which unfortunately we don't get on Maui, but called Willie Wednesdays, and truck drivers can call in from wherever they're at, talk to Willie directly, and he just started telling them that you got to get on biodiesel, and darned if he didn't make an impact. And so now we're starting to see biodiesel blends showing up at truck stops across the country.
Sometimes celebrities, they take positions on nonprofit issues, on causes, and you wonder if they're being sincere about it. But it seems to me that biofuel is perfectly sincere for him.
Absolutely.
It's really him.
Yeah, he helped us get the nonprofit off the ground, the Sustainable Biodiesel Alliance. He was the one that hooked us up with Hard Rock Cafe, and they did our first big fundraiser to kick it off.
So what's he like? I mean, is he as raspy as he is when he's singing?
He's kind of mellowed out, I think, his later years. But, he never, I don't think, in all the conversations I've had with him, he's never really had many regrets in his life, which I think is a wonderful thing.
Really is a wonderful thing.
I asked him one time, he was telling me about selling the Patsy Cline, her most famous song. He wrote it, and I said, well, you sold it to her for $50. Do you ever look back and regret that? And he goes, hey, I needed the $50.
We won't ask
which is a
why.
great attitude, I mean, it's just, at the time it was a lot of money.
That's great. I really like him. I think he's sincere. That's why I like
Yeah,
him.
yeah, very
He's just
sincere, and
telling
his
you what's
wife
on his
is
mind.
great, a great advocate, a great friend.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that was interesting. Thank you for talking about that, Kelly. But back to biofuel in the legislature. So, what do you see happening on the facilities bill? Is this going to sail right through, or
I hate to say that it's going to sail right through because
nobody ever says that?
if you ever say that, that's the surest way to
bocce.
make it not happen. But we're very hopeful that it'll go through. There's good support on the House and the Senate side. There aren't any increases in the budget to make these changes. It's basically wording, and it's inclusive. It's including other types of fuel other than ethanol.
Well, how far did that get? It was a whole definition discussion. What is the definition now?
Well, the definition is biofuel, renewable biofuel that meets an ASTM standard, which the American. I have to always think about what that acronym stands for, but Society of Testing and Materials has an actual standard for biodiesel, for petroleum fuels, for ethanol, and they're developing one for certain renewable fuels. But there was some discussion about opening that up to any type of renewable fuel, which could actually include the grease after you cook your eggs in the morning. I mean, if you open it up too wide, what we've seen nationally when they didn't pay attention to that in federal legislation is that people would just start collecting grease and start claiming credits against it and not doing anything to it, basically. And so there has to be some measure, some way to measure what is a commercial application, because that's what costs money to make.
Yeah.
You don't want to be giving people credits when they haven't really put any investment in to make a
fill
product.
up the trucks. You need to meet the standard to fill up the truck.
Right.
Well, I like to talk about biofuel. For one reason, we need to know the difference between continuous process and batch. And for another reason, I'd like to explore with you the migration, the evolution of the fuel, as it is used. Because, you've been working on, animal fats, restaurant fats, fuels from the beginning. You and Bob, that's where your technology comes from. And now we're talking about agriculture.
Right.
What's the difference? Where's it going to go? Which one is going to, come out and beat the scalable one, yeah?
Well,
But first tell me about continuous versus batch processing.
Okay, continuous means that you have a continuous pipe. As you're feeding your feedstock in, it's continually going through the process. There's no break in the delivery. Batch is when you have, we'll have a batch of, I think it's about, 5,000 gallons or something like that, and it goes through the batch system. And so what we've developed for our Oregon plant and what will be, built for the Gila plant is what we call continuous batch. So continuous batch means
Roger,
it's a batch
you wanted
process.
an answer, you're going to get an answer here.
It's a batch process. So you have a starting quantity and an ending quantity, and but you're starting one batch, and then as soon as it gets to the next tank, you start the next one. So they're continuous batch. The advantage of that, and we've found that has been the most robust system over the 15 years we've operated, because we've watched a lot of continuous flow plants go down and go bankrupt. And what happens in the continuous flow is that you have to have one type of stable, very low free fatty acid, meaning very clean type of oil to go through that. And if it varies from that, if you get some fuel, if it's going through the pipeline, all of a sudden you have 3% free fatty acids instead of 1%, it can screw up your system. You shut everything down. You lose everything that's in the system. You have to start all over again. You can lose days of production.
You have to throw it out.
Yeah, basically. With the batch, you're taking, we're testing, we do this titration test, which is basically test free fatty acid and the quality of the oil going in. And if it's a certain level, we pre-treat it. We can treat it differently before it goes into the reactor tanks to be made into biodiesel. And even if it comes out the end and we test it and there's something a little bit off, we can put it back into the system. So we never lose any product. We never lose, we might lose a little bit of time, but we never lose any feedstock and we never lose any product.
Much more efficient then.
It's much more efficient in the long run. And the other thing is, the other difference between our technology and most of the continuous flow is basically one feedstock operation. Batch process for all of our technology is multi-feedstock, so we can process the most degraded oils all the way to the purest oils. and everything in between. And we just have different pre-treatments on the front end, which when
Before you put it into the main system.
before we put it into the reactor
Yeah.
tank. But the virgin oils are no problem to process if you can process really degraded 50% free fatty acid oils. So I think that's one of the things that carried us through that year, the black hole year when there was no biodiesel FET credit, and about half of our industry went bankrupt. We were actually the only biodiesel operation in America to actually be profitable that year. And then, of course, at the end of the year, the credits came back retroactive, and for half of our industry, it was too late. For the ones that just sequestered and could come back, they're struggling, but they're trying to come back. But the ones who actually went bankrupt had accumulated too much debt to survive. It was really sad, and we saw operations that were $8 to $50 million plants on the auction block for starting at $500,000.
This teaches us something, doesn't it? I mean, this is a big lesson. It's like almost an experiment. You pull a credit, see what happens, it collapses. Now there's a relationship. I mean, a defined, visible relationship between the credit and the success of the industry. So you don't pull the credit again.
You're right. You make it more consistent so that people can bank on it. But the other thing that we learn is, how should we be doing biodiesel? If you build a 50 million gallon a year plant or a 100 million gallon a year plant based on 1% free fatty acid soybean oil, and soybean oil goes through the roof, now what do? If you have a month down, we had periods with our Oregon plant for maybe 3 or 4 weeks during that bad year, and I think I'm going to say probably 3 times during the year, where we had to shut the plant down and lay people off because feedstock went too high, and then it would come down, and then we'd get everybody working again. So we maybe had 3 periods of that between 2 and 4 weeks at a time, but we survived it. If you have 2 to 4 weeks down and you're producing 5 million gallons a year, it's survivable. If you're producing 100 million gallons a year and you have a period like that down, that's not survivable. That's it's kind of that idea
the investment in the equipment and all that you're paying,
and the amount of income that you have put on your spreadsheet that you're not making for a month because you can't afford to buy the feedstock.
Well, so how do you it's sort of like airlines buying aviation fuel. You try to hedge on it, and you buy futures on it, and maybe you even grow it yourself. You've looked at those things, haven't you?
And we are.
The answer is yes.
When we started, we were working with some haulers on Maui and, getting the grease from them. And we thought, well, this is a great model. We don't ever really want to have to be doing that ourselves.
So you're going to the restaurant business.
And now we're, now
Joke.
we had, then we saw the need here on this island. So we actually got involved in the trucking industry here. We started picking up the used cooking oil. And when we came to Oahu to pick up used cooking oil, the restaurants were paying $1 or more per gallon to the haulers to pick up the oil. And we came in and we said, we'll pick it up for free. And it's a great model because we can use it for something. The restaurants are making money off of it.
Yeah.
And then we had the chains like McDonald's that said, hey, if you're picking it up for free on Oahu, why are we paying to have it picked up on Maui?
Oh.
And so that's what we said, oh. And so, we went to the haulers and we said, you're making money off of us. You're making money off the restaurants. It's time for you to, give a little back. You're going to need to do this model, pick it up for free from the restaurants because that's what they're expecting. And they didn't want to do it, so we did it. So, thinking that we were never going to be in the grease hauling business, now we're in the grease hauling business. And by the way, now we have our trucking operations associated with our Oregon plant have become the largest waste grease haulers in the Pacific Northwest.
I love these conversations because something is always over the top.
Yeah.
So you now have hauling in Oregon, in
Maui, Oahu, and the Big Island. Yeah, we just put trucks over there, and it's helping.
But it's a necessary element. It's a
vertical integration. Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing we thought we probably work with farmers beyond the level of grease, and we're not farmers, but now we've become farmers.
Well, let's talk about so we have a kind of a corner on the grease market for one thing. I mean, if you're hauling, you're going to get the lion's share of what you want because you have the ability. So it's the whole model is like it's defined, it's polished. Now stop and let's look at agriculture all of a sudden. How is that? And you're using, by the way, the restaurant grease model for the airport contract, right?
Well, we'll use whatever we have. I mean,
Okay.
we we're hoping that by the time, what does it take, 12 to 18 months for the PUC to finally get a contract on the docket?
From your
and
lips to
approve it?
God's ears. Yeah.
So, we're hoping by then there'll be some substantial biofuel crops. And we are working with local farmers on the Big Island. We've got the Twig Smiths growing Jatropha.
So does this mean, what does this mean? Here's a company, for 15 years, you guys have been great, and you built your model around restaurants and restaurant grease and all that, and it works. I mean, God knows what you could do. I mean, if you had all the grease from all the restaurants, you could. It's a sustainable model because it works for everybody in the cycle.
Right.
But now, full stop, we're going to take a look at agriculture. Why? And where does that play against the first model?
Okay, why is because there's going to be a cap of grease that's available, and we don't want to go out into the community and push more donuts and French fries. So, as people eat healthier, there might even be less grease. So we know there's a finite, and it's somewhere around 3 million gallons a year, we think.
For the state.
Which includes the trap grease, which we now, we have advanced our technology to be able to process trap grease, which we couldn't do a few years ago.
Yeah.
But there's probably about there's a lot more trap grease collected, just trap grease material collected, but for every gallon of trap grease we collect, there's only 10% oil. So we figure the oil we can get from trap grease is about half as much as we can get from the used cooking oil. So the total is somewhere around 3 million gallons, and obviously our needs are a lot bigger than that. So, agriculture is the next step.
When you say your needs are bigger than that, I mean, it comes to my mind, you can disabuse me on this, but somewhere in there is other markets. It's passenger cars, maybe, maybe even airplanes. Is that part
Could be,
of what
but if you just look at the amount of diesel fuel that's used on road in the state of Hawaii for fleets, there are a few passenger cars, but mostly trucking fleets and other transportation. That's about 50 million gallons a year.
That's much more
and
than
all we can
restaurants
make is 3, yeah. So, we have to go to agriculture.
But you could do it. I mean, this is a biofuel thing. Whatever the source, you have this market. You have the passenger car market. And am I right to think that you might conceivably also have the aviation market? You have the ships, right?
We do have it in some of the ships. We are selling. We've got all 5 Arizona Memorial shuttles running on B-20, which is really exciting. So we're in the military. We're in government fleets. We're in backup generation, which is the airport project. We're in farming. I think almost every small organic farm on Maui is running on biodiesel. And this great story about that is that when they first started, they have those ride-on mowers they sit on top of, and they have to inhale their own fumes. And the first guy that ever went on biodiesel, he said, "Oh my God, I don't get stomach aches anymore because I'm not inhaling the petroleum fumes." So,
but it makes them hungry.
yeah. So it's a health issue too, but beyond, even beyond the on-road transportation, we are selling fuel into the energy market. MECO is our customer on Maui.
That's generation.
And power generation for electricity, and they actually need it. They need biodiesel to meet their emission standards.
They mix it with other things, or they just...
Well, what happens is when they fire up their generators, the period where they're firing them up have really high emissions, and the period where they shut them off have really high emissions. So they got fined, I think it was $1.8 million by the EPA. This was 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, for being out of compliance with emissions. And they hired a guy who's a good friend of ours now, but he came from Texas, and he did a big feasibility study and told them, well, you can spend tens of millions replacing these engines, or you can spend tens of millions fixing this up, or you could put biodiesel in it. He said, you got biodiesel on the island. And he actually found us, and so we did a test. It's a really interesting test we did on biodiesel on the MECO generators, where they brought the guys in, the bosses in from Honolulu. The Mitsubishi guys flew in because they wanted to see how it worked in their engine. We had guys from the Department of Energy.
The whole thing with the
Maui
coming together.
testing this to see how biodiesel. And then my husband Bob went down, And they put biodiesel in, they fired up the generators, and the gauges just barely moved.
No emissions.
And they went, well, there's something wrong with the gauges.
I love this.
Stop. And they took the gauges off, sent them to Honolulu for recalibration. Everybody reassembled a couple days later, and they tried the same thing. The gauges barely moved. And they went, okay, I guess it's working. So, they were jumping up and down, and we've been selling them biodiesel ever since. But what happens is when they get up to running at an efficient level, then they shut it off. So they have a very easy system. They've got biodiesel tanks that hold the biodiesel, and all they have to do is flip a switch. They're on biodiesel, flip a switch,
And then
they're off.
when they shut it on again, the same thing. You start off with the biodiesel, and, and then when you're running,
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, and then
right.
if you're going to shut it off, and one of the things that's happened with the wind farm is it's caused more startup and shutdowns because it's intermittent, and so they're using more biodiesel now because they have
well, this reminds me of the peaking plant at Kapolei, which runs on biodiesel, but it's not your biodiesel. It's biodiesel in these big tanks out there, and they get it from somewhere in the Midwest, right? And it's fat biodiesel.
It's used cooking oil.
Used cooking oil. And I don't know the pricing and whether it's comparative or whether you're comparative, but I wonder where that fits. Is that the future? I mean, is that going to continue? Is that sustainable to use that kind of?
Yeah, no, it's not sustainable, and really, in the full picture of sustainability, there should be somebody next to that plant using that fuel.
Somebody what?
Somebody next to that plant using that fuel, in the Midwest.
Yeah, yeah.
Not shipping it all the way to Hawaii.
Yeah, because you've got to spend all this money shipping
Right,
it. That's what I was thinking.
But the Midwest is where they have the feedstock because that's where they're growing all the crops, and so we have to get there in Hawaii where we're growing our own crops for our own feedstock.
Yeah.
And by the way, one of the companies that recently had a contract rejected by the PUC still wants to do their model, their 24 million gallon a year model, but they're planning to ship it to the mainland. So now we're going to have fuel coming from the Midwest to HECO and fuel coming from the Big Island with our resources going to the mainland.
We have to talk about that.
That's ridiculous.
part
It's a
of the discussion.
ridiculous model, and something's got to be done about that.
So anyway, going back to the Kapolei peaking plant, that could and probably should run on local biofuel, but we don't have the capacity to do that now. Huh?
We don't have the capacity for the feedstock, right?
Yeah.
I mean, building the capacity to make it into biodiesel is, for us, it's a no-brainer.
It would be cheaper if we
oh,
doing it because
absolutely.
you don't have the fuel.
It would be cheaper. Not only
cost.
would it be cheaper than shipping it over, but the peripheral benefits of the jobs it would bring, the
Yeah, sure,
economy,
all those
the
things.
taxes, and for our model, every dollar of revenue we bring in, 90 cents of it stays in the state.
Yeah.
Every dollar of revenue that stays in the state is multiplied 3 to 5
Sure,
times.
all
So
around.
when it circulates.
So here we have an obvious market in need. I mean, we didn't really cover the aviation thing. I'd like to do that.
Okay.
Do you have the technology? Could you make the technology? I believe you guys could do anything.
the
sort
technology
of walk-on
is
water
there.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could take the biofuel and make it into aviation fuel. Could you?
We could. And the technology is there. It's not rocket science at this point. It's expensive. So what we're being asked to do basically is spend more money and more resources to make a cheaper fuel, because Jet A fuel, aviation fuel is cheaper than diesel number 2. So we're making a good living making biodiesel, selling it into the diesel 2 market, and until we have a conceivably good reason to put more money and resources into developing our own aviation fuel plant that takes more energy than to make biodiesel and makes a product that even the U.S. government military wants to pay less for.
Yeah.
And that's bridging that is the interesting thing, and we actually are looking at doing that. We've put in a response to the military RFI. And I think it's a great model because it's a matching fund deal. They have $510 million, and they want to do 5 projects across the U.S., partnering with.
You're part of that.
Well, they're putting out an RFP, so we're not
Okay.
part of it yet. They put out an RFI to get a response from people in the industry to see what the potential was, or. Not that you can see the true potential by what people tell you over the
We know that.
RFI, but just to see what the response level would be. And the next step is for them to put out an RFP. And we've got some people we're partnering with on the feedstock side, which is probably the most critical side of this whole thing. But the idea that if we could get matching funds that would match what we've already invested in the biodiesel plant and build that component onto our plant. And because one of the issues with this military offer and you know, Bob asked the question, being probably the one person in business in that room when they had the meeting about it at the
Yeah.
Asia Pacific conference, is the military then going to guarantee a contract for the fuel? And the answer was a resounding no.
Well, how do they expect
You-
anybody to do anything then?
Well, we're gonna, you know, you only have, if it costs you, you know, $50 million to do this, we're gonna give you 25 million. But, you know, would you spend 25 million building a plant if that was to be your sole revenue stream, if they weren't gonna guarantee you a contract?
You have to talk to the commercial airlines.
Well, you know, even they will say, well, we wanna see how much it's gonna cost.
Sure.
You know, so the idea that you know, the position that we're in is we already have a revenue stream, we already have a business model, we already have a biodiesel plant, you know, here, Oregon, Texas, and several other places. And if we could and they did say we could use, you know, that investment as matching funds. So if we got money to put in the component for the drop-in fuels, then the idea would be, it's like an insurance policy. You know, it's sitting here. It's like a bomb shelter. You know, it costs a lot of money to build a bomb shelter for all of our Congress people, and hopefully you never have to use it, but it's there if we need it. You know, if we get to a point where they're willing to pay the price that needs to be paid to take our biodiesel and process it into biojet fuel, we'll do it.
It's just one step more.
It's one step more, but we can have it there ready if we have a disaster and we need it. Otherwise, we will focus on, you know, where we're making money
sure.
and where we're
And nobody can
benefiting.
expect anything other than
Yeah,
that.
and I think it's a beautiful model. It's, you know, it'd be difficult for anyone else to do because they don't already have
Yeah.
that business there, and, you know, to sustain you while you're waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with the value of, you know, I mean, the value of biofuel is always measured against the price of diesel fuel. It's not measured against the amount of energy that goes into it or the benefits of it or anything like
But
that.
that's because the fleet is out there, and they're not going to change the fleet all around.
But if they don't need to change the fleet, they just need to change the fuel. They still are measuring it against the price of diesel. You know what I'm saying? You know,
Yeah.
they're not looking at the environmental
No,
benefits and the jobs
Well,
and all those things.
we're going to
yeah.
get to the component in a minute. But and that's the state of the market. I believe that you're absolutely right, and that also there will be something in aviation fuel. And one more question about that: where does the biofuel possibility for aviation fuel fit as against the algae possibility for biofuel for bio-aviation fuel? Are those the same? Are they different? Which one is
Algae is
working?
another feedstock. You
Yeah.
know, algae is another
But different
feedstock.
process, no?
Not necessarily.
Oh.
No, I mean, they're making oil out of it. I mean, we take oil from animal fat, use cooking oil, virgin crop oil, and we make it into the same product at the end. And so the algae guys are working. Well, they're working against, you know, a lot of challenges, and one of those is energy. It takes a lot of energy to grow algae and then extract oil out of it. It's like 3% oil or something like that. And the problem with that, you almost get stuck in a catch-22 because the higher the cost of energy, the more biodiesel makes sense, right? I mean, as diesel climbs, we need less and less subsidies. But if your model is based on, if your highest input is energy, then as that value goes up, so do your input costs. That's one of the problems. We've been working over the years to lower our energy costs, to make our technology more and more efficient. And now the Hilo plant is going to make fuel at half the cost of the current two plants.
Wow.
Because of the efficiencies built in. And it'll be a higher
a
capital
lot
cost.
of efficient, not just one stroke.
No, they're like
a lot of
things.
things.
Yeah, there's several different components, and one of them is a distillation column that was partly funded by HREDV grant. But this will actually, I mean, the Oregon plant is amazing. The efficiencies of that plant, and and it's all, most of it's automated. We have guys out we have guys doing receiving and sales, and we have guys doing, monitoring the system, but a lot of it's computerized.
This all teaches us something, doesn't it? It teaches us that you start out with a technology and a sort of a system, and in your heart, in your mind, in your arms and legs, that it's going to get better,
Mhm.
that your practices will improve, the technology will improve. Things will happen if you keep your eyes open, and it will get to be half the price. And this goes especially, I mean, there's a lot of things, but especially for biofuel.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be half the price, because one of the things that the efficiencies is going to allow us to do is to get into the ag side. Because we know when we start buying oil from farmers, it's going to cost more. It won't be as cheap as used cooking oil.
Before we get to farmers, just one last question, and that is, am I right to assume from what you've said so far that actually biofuel from animal fat is, or cooking oil, whatever, is more expensive than a gallon of diesel?
Well, if you take into account all the subsidies that diesel gets,
No,
I mean,
to the guy who's using it.
to the
When he
guy-
has to pay for it and put it in his
No,
vehicle,
I mean,
whatever.
we're the cheapest, we're cheaper than any diesel fuel on Maui, our pump. We're at
There's
409.
transportation costs.
Yeah, we're at 409 per gallon.
And what is it for diesel fuel?
I think the lowest right now is about 460.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's 10% anyway.
Mhm.
Well, so why would anybody use conventional diesel fuel then?
Well, a lot of it is convincing people that, to do something different, to try something new, and that there's nothing wrong with it. We fought a lot of battles with the service departments of VW, back in Maui in the early days. And somebody takes their car with a problem to the service department at VW, and it has a sticker that says powered by biodiesel. And guarantee the first thing the guy is going to do before he even looks under your hood is tell you, well, that's your problem. You're running on biodiesel. And that's happened over and over again. No one's ever been able to link a problem to the fuel, but that's the first thing they want to blame it on.
Sure.
And so, the
That's
reason
called
we
dinosaur.
and the reason we survived those early years is because my husband's the best diesel mechanic on the island of Maui. We were the Cummins engine dealership for Maui County, and so many times, I can't even count all the times that, a customer would call us up from the service department. He'd run down there, and he'd actually fix their car for them while they were in the, it was like a little glitch in the air system or something like that, while they're sitting there with a quote for a new fuel pump for $1,800. So, those are issues that are ongoing. Not getting support from the engine manufacturers. We're starting to get more and more support from Cummins. We actually got a lot of support from Cummins in the early years because we were their dealer here on Maui. And we ran all of our Dodge Ram trucks, the work trucks on biodiesel in the early years. But it's a mindset, getting people convinced.
I'm sure it's in every part of the market. And
It's not necessarily, it's being, sorry about that, it's being priced right now by other people. Let me turn this off.
you can answer him, but we'll have to include it in the tape. Whatever it is.
It's being the price of fuel is being priced out differently depending on who is retailing it. So we have a lot of folks that we are wholesaling it to, and we don't control the price at the pump. We don't. You'll go to the 76 station, you won't see biodiesel for 409, but that's not our price.
Right.
So depending on, and that's the mindset of the commodities market.
But
It's
you're
being
having an
priced
effect
against-
on the commodities market.
I think so. I think
It's not the
so,
same
yeah.
as it was. So, okay, all that aside, agriculture. You decide there's a glass ceiling here somewhere, you're going to go agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? How do you do it? And how do you get down the trail on that? How far down the trail are you now?
How far down the trail? Well, let's see. We're planning our second planting. We did our first planting of these demonstration crops back
Jatropha?
in no, the ones that we're doing on Oahu with the military. We're working on a military a congressional appropriation through our sponsors at the Army Corps of Engineers, and we have a 2-year project. It was funded for about $2.5 million, and we did one first planting. We did sunflower, safflower, camelina, some other things like flax and chia was one of them.
So you're just testing one against the other, see how much oil
Testing
comes
to
out?
see what the inputs are, how
Yeah.
expensive. The yield is not as important as the cost, because if you have 2 acres and one is camelina, one is sunflower, and one's yielding 100 gallons an acre and the other one's yielding 200, but it costs you 3 times as much to grow this one, where we have to get away from, and that's one of the things that you hear from the algae guys too when they say how many thousands of gallons. Well, it doesn't matter if it's 4,000 gallons an acre if it costs you $17 a gallon, right? The important thing is how much is the cost of the finished oil when you get it off of the thing. So that's really our focus right now is, what are the inputs? And, sunflower takes 25% of what water, of what it takes sugarcane and about 1/10 of the water of growing tomatoes. And so we're looking at those kinds of things as far as available resources, cost of resources, what are the issues with pest control, what are the issues with different
So
types
who's
of soil.
leading? Can you give us a, well, you have to kill me if you tell me.
Right now, our farm guys, our project manager and our farm manager, right now I think their favorite one is safflower. For
Did you
ease of
expect that?
growing.
Is that a surprise?
Well, no, it's not a surprise because I've talked to farmers on the mainland. They say there's nothing a cow would rather eat than safflower meal. And so we knew that was going to be
Cows know something.
Cows must know something. But, the fact that the pests, they don't have a pest problem, the birds won't touch it because it's very thorny. We did have a bird problem with the sunflowers, and if you see these big giant heads hanging over, the birds will get on top of the heads and they lean over, and so just a bit like about 10% of the top of each flower is eaten because that's all they could reach. So there's some of those issues that we're going to be dealing with in the second. We're finding ways to try to alleviate, to do bird abatement in the next planting.
So you're actually working out best practices. It's not just a
Yes,
test.
we're going to have a production model with best
advancing your best
practices, and we're going to be testing in different areas with different soils. We're going to do some experiments with composting and biochar, and so I think all these things will come into play.
That's great.
And the bottom line, like I said, is how much does it cost per gallon?
Well, yeah, but you said it didn't matter about the acreage, and I wonder how you answer the people who make these claims that we can't do biofuel because it takes too much land. Is that a true argument? Is that a valid argument?
No, I don't think it's a valid argument because we have so much fallow land. Right now there's a big push to get farmers back on the land, and if you can't get them to grow food, then let's get them to grow fuel, or let's get them to grow both. Let's get them to grow either crops that could be used as food and fuel, or the reason it's really important to look at these 100-day crops is what we call them. 100 days from
Turns
soil
over
to
quickly.
oil.
Yeah.
Because
soil to oil.
Yeah.
You heard it here on ThinkTech Hawaii.
So you can get if you can get 3 crops of sunflowers in a year, then you're on the same acre, you're tripling your yield. But the idea is that these crops don't have to necessarily sequester land for 30 years. You can rotate in food crops, you can rotate in other biofuel crops, you can rotate in crops that are going to fix your soil. If you do one crop for too long, you get certain types of pests, you rotate
I
something
keep
else.
thinking, when you and Bob got into this, 15 years ago, did you know anything about these things?
Nothing. I knew that, it's funny, it was about 10 years ago I started talking about biofuel crops and people just laughed at me. And they said, that's never going to happen because oil's too cheap and land's too expensive, and just stop talking about it. And even back then we knew in order to do it, you'd have to have byproducts to offset the cost. So, it really didn't discourage me, because when you look at our land, even though it's more expensive versus the mainland, we can get 3 crops a year off of this acre. You can only get 1 crop a year.
Sure.
So now we've
That's
tripled
perfect.
our output.
Yeah.
So we can pay 3 times as much for the land. So, those kinds of things.
So do you think, in the end, and we're still holding Ina Ko'opono to the side, in the end, could Hawaii be a place where you have a whole generation of farmers who are willing to farm both, fuel and food, who are involved in, what could be a middle-class life, a relatively profitable experience on the farms, where they own the farms or have long-term leases, and actually feed into a system where you're creating biofuel out of this and running the generators with it,
Right.
which exist. I don't think people out there understand that the generators exist. You don't have to rebuild them.
Right.
And fuel is the question, not
Right.
revamping the whole system. That's what's so valuable about biofuel.
Yeah, and we have such a perfect system in our grids here, not just the Hawaii Electric Utility, but even KIUC. They've got the generators, like you said, they've got the backup there. Bringing renewables onto the grid shouldn't be an issue when you're already backed up, and they can back it up with biodiesel. It shouldn't be looked at as prime power. It should be looked at as backing up other types of renewables.
Right. So you get the renewables as the primary, if you can.
Right.
And then you have the base load, that keeps things going at night.
And that
whatever.
can kick in any time.
Yeah. So this is really a great prospect. I mean, this is my view. I think it's your view. I think we're together in the sense that this could be the great solution to the problem that we are seeing.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think one of the things, it's one of those, it's so obvious, and And it's simple but not easy, because farming is not easy. Farming is hard work, but people who farm love it. We just have to find more people who love to farm. And the problem has been that, it's a lot of hard work. It's not a silver bullet. We're not going to come in and instantly in the next year have everything we need to do this farming. We're going to have to build these systems over. But once you build, the more work something takes, usually the more valuable it is and the more sustainable it is. And
That's the same thing about legislation.
Yeah. I'm excited because, now since we built the biodiesel plant, we're in construction on the biodiesel plant on the Big Island. And by the way, if you get on our website, biodiesel.com, you can see the progress of the construction, because on the first page there's a scrolling
Time lapse and all this,
pictures, and
yeah.
if you click on
That's
the picture of the Big Island plant, I think we're taking pictures every 15 minutes, so
That's
you can
great.
see production.
I gotta go look.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, it's not very exciting when you see rainy days and no one's out there working.
Depends on your orientation.
That's a real bummer. But when you see stuff happening, and now we've got things coming up, now we're 3D, we're done with the groundwork and all the electrical, and there's amazing amount of hurricane and potential volcano.
Aren't you going to run into the same problem that Idaho did? I mean, so here they say they're going to make biofuel and they're going to sell it at a secret price, which is probably in some circles not so secret, but it's a secret price that nobody can talk about. And this price is somehow too high, and because of that, no approval, and because of that, they go to the mainland and sell it there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
at the same moment,
but they
the
haven't made
utility
fuel
is
yet.
biofuel from the mainland and shipping it here.
Yeah.
I guess the ships, they pass at night carrying biofuel.
Well, there are two things about that. First of all, the technology has not been proven out for Idaho, so there's no guarantee they're actually going to be making fuel. I mean, we wish them the best, but the other issue with the contract is it was for 20 years, a huge amount of fuel, and it was going to encumber the utility at that increasing price for 20 years.
24 million gallons per annum is what?
Well, and who knows, the contract maybe even called for more down the
Probably,
line.
expanded.
But that's encumbering the ratepayer for whatever the secret price is for a long time. The difference between that and our contract is for backup generation for the airport. It's I think it's 3 or 5 years. It's a very short period of time. It's a very small quantity of fuel. It's the contract is for 250,000 to 1 million, somewhere in between there. I mean, we're obligated to provide at least 250,000 gallons.
But
And we
if
can
they
go up
don't
to-
need to use it, then what happens?
Well, they can
You
use it
just
somewhere.
keep it topped off.
They can use it anywhere. I mean,
Do they? Are they?
All
Will they?
their fleets are running on biodiesel right now. Their
Right,
trucks.
okay. So it isn't really contingent, it's actually in use.
Right. It'll be, the 250,000 will be in use, and we've built in up to 1 million gallons in case, so that we don't have to go back to the PUC if it requires more. But it's just a very practical amount. It's a very practical length of time.
Suppose you have
It's a
all
backup.
you have you have your crops worked out, you have best practices, you have farmers who are willing to farm, you have a whole system, and now you're capable of doing 24 million gallons a year. Okay, what do you do? I mean, your existing backup system is not appropriate. I mean, in terms of a contract with the utility, now you're going to have a contract with the utility where you can keep going whatever system you build in that kind of scale.
Well,
how do you
if it
protect
goes
yourself?
if it goes into the utility, but
Okay, that's a big if,
we have we're only budgeting a portion of our fuel for the utility, because really most of it, we believe, will go into transportation.
And for that, you don't require.
We could probably put the whole 24 million into Young Brothers at some point if they get into biodiesel. I mean, there's an amazing amount of fuel, a diesel fuel, that gets used for freight all around the island.
But they're interested in doing that. I know they wanted to buy biofuel out of Seattle, was it? Washington? That was part of their deal.
Yeah.
Renewables.
Imperium.
Yeah, but then it didn't work.
Well, it was, because I think Imperium is one of those large plants that there's not enough local feedstock, so they're importing palm oil.
Yeah.
And even Oregon has gone so far because they don't want to be part of the whole palm oil,
Right,
the
there's
destruction of the
a problem with
rainforest and
that,
all that.
yeah.
So Oregon has actually put into their state law, because they have a 5% mandate for biodiesel through the state of Oregon. Every gallon of diesel fuel that's sold at a pump, in Oregon has to be 5% biodiesel. But in their state law, they define biodiesel, and they define it as made by any of these feedstocks except palm oil. So, they can do that because they're never going to grow it there. So they're keeping out imported feedstocks. For us, we wouldn't want to put that in because hopefully someone might be growing it here at some
Palm
day.
oil, sure.
We can grow it here.
Wouldn't that be
And
something?
it would be wonderful as long as it's not clearing a rainforest to do it.
yeah.
That's the biggest objection.
So, but if you had going back, so forget about, providing baseload supply for the utility for generation systems. Let's assume you had a huge amount of biofuel that you would sell to the fleet, so to speak, including the marine fleet. Does that require PUC approval? Can you just do it?
I think it depends. I think for anything that's a public utility, it would. So probably for Young Brothers,
Young
it would,
Brothers,
because
yeah.
that affects people's freight rates.
Right.
Anything that's going to affect the public or ratepayers has to go through. But we didn't have to go through. I think we went through the city and county council when we started selling to the fleet, the diesel fleet. And interestingly enough, it started out as an experimental in 1 or 2 base yards. Robert Primiano, who's the fleet manager, came to me and he said, I really want to do this. He was the head of Clean Cities at the time. He said, I really want to get biodiesel in here, but I need you not to announce it. I need you not to, like, Robert, you're talking to the marketing person, that was going to be my next press release. And he said, no, please don't tell anybody. And so he just started using, at these 2 base yards, he started using B20. He just put it in. He didn't even tell them what it was. And so they're running all the trucks and all the diesel vehicles on B20 from those base yards. And about 9 months later, he went to the head mechanics. He said, we're going to start using biodiesel. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. That's going to mess up our engines. It's going to, and all the reasons why they didn't want to change the fuel. And he said, well, have you been having problems, or they're running fine right now? Don't
This
touch
is really
them.
Hawaii style, isn't
And
it?
he said, well, you've been using it for 9 months, guys.
Yeah.
And then he came to me and he said, now you can put their press release out.
It's easier to ask forgiveness.
Well, and it really is an issue with changing your mind first. We worked with the military on the sustainability test vehicles, and they tested their tactical vehicles on B20. And they were doing it at the time in 7 states, but they were creating a before survey that they were giving out to everybody who was dealing with these vehicles. And when I talked to the Navy folks about it, I said, could you put on there something about what their attitude about biodiesel is? Because invariably, if their attitude is negative, it's not going to work. If their attitude is positive, it's going to work.
So many things that applies that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's not, you'll hear stories for and against, and it really has to do with how flexible someone is and how forward-thinking they are.
So, yeah, let's go to that, okay?
Okay.
It strikes me and a lot of people I talk to that while in 2008, what somebody said in the paper today, we're almost at 5 years already. Well, that's true, I guess. 4 anyway. We made a decision. I thought we made a decision. I mean, whether you agreed with it or not, but I thought we made a decision to do this. But if you went and took a sampling on Bishop Street outside, do we make a decision? You want to do it? You want to pay more? Because you got to pay more sometimes to build new infrastructure. People would say, no, I don't want to pay more. I want to pay less, and I don't care. And the existing system is fine with me. And the fickle finger writes and moves on, and public opinion is so fickle.
But we're going to pay more. We're going to pay more either way.
Of course.
If all of our renewables went away tomorrow, guess what would happen with petroleum?
Of course.
We're going to pay more. It's just, are we going to pay more and do it ourselves? Or are we going to pay more to the guys overseas?
How
That's
do
the
you
question.
make, this state, if every man, woman, and child in this state got on board and said, Kelly, you're right, let's do it. Let's do everything we can do right now and move ahead with this. Let's not, hesitate on anything. We could do it. That would be easy. But we don't have that.
Right.
And we have an awful lot of people in the state who don't know, don't want, don't care. This doesn't affect them, and they just go through their lives with their, looking at their shoelaces. And how do we get them to look up a little? How do we get them to see this horizon? Because, you talk about whether it's acceptable to the people who might use it. I think a lot of people don't know, and for that reason do not buy in. What are we going to do?
Well, I think one place to start, and I think DBED started doing this to some extent, because I sat in a stakeholders meeting last year during the legislative session talking about the facilities bill, and DBED had some data they were putting together on the benefits of the biofuels and the job creation, kind of like what we've done is, to say how much of the dollars would stay here and how much doesn't now. And, when you can show people, I think we're going to do it in a big way with this new plant on the Big Island, because it's going to be the most sophisticated plant of its size in the United States. But it will also show the level of jobs. We already created 85 construction jobs with this plant. That's what it's taking to build it. And peripherally, if we have the numbers on construction jobs and agricultural jobs and operational jobs, and then peripheral jobs of, we're already talking to new stations that are going on in over there that are going to be starting to sell this fuel. And the types of jobs that we can bring here, the delivery jobs of fuel going from the plant to the station versus the guys that are delivering it from the mainland to over here, which are mainland jobs. Those numbers need to be written. Those numbers need to be studied, researched and studied and written, so people can see not just, they've heard a lot about the environmental benefits. And there's, I can't believe I'm still arguing with people about global warming, but I did have this discussion
I know exactly what you mean.
With an engineer.
It's
And
that
finally,
fickle finger again.
Yeah, and finally he relented that, okay, well, I do believe in global warming, but I don't think it's caused by man. So that's the big argument right now, is what's causing it. And the recent information that has come out in the last couple of weeks, even the information, the studies have been funded by the people who are trying to disprove global warming, that are doing nothing but proving it and proving the cause of it being man-made. That's not moving people. So there are going to be people who just, and I don't want to name names, but the Tea Party comes to mind.
We don't have enough time for you to name names.
But there are going to be people who can look squarely at the facts and say, I don't care, that's not true. And you can't really do anything about that. You have to focus on the people who can make a difference, want to make a difference, who aren't all about, who are looking towards the future and community and aren't all about the bottom line and, how many dollars can be made. So, and I think there are a lot of people like that in this state. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to fund the Big Island biodiesel plant with all local entities if there weren't quite a few.
Yeah, that was an achievement.
19 investor groups. And some of those investor groups represent 3 or 4 residents, because they got together and formed a hui.
Old-fashioned hui style. That's great.
Yeah, and if you can't, because they couldn't meet the minimum individually, so they got together.
That's
and
great.
So the great thing is that a lot of them are Big Island residents, and so this is truly
Take a
owned
stake in
by
it.
Big Island.
So there's, I'm coming up with, from what you say, some thoughts here about how you change or how you ensure that public opinion will come along. One is, nothing succeeds quite like success. And so if you actually building these plants and you can point to it, especially brick and mortar, that's really, that leaves an impression on people. Another is jobs, which, and frankly, jobs may not be the best indicator, but it really reaches people at home so that they see that there's something happening in the community.
And not just minimum wage jobs, good quality. I mean, we were the recipient of the 2011 Green Jobs Award, which picked 7 companies in the United States, and we were one of them. And we have about 36 employees in Hawaii. I think with the Oregon operations, we have over 100. So it wasn't necessarily about numbers. It was about quality of jobs and the sustainability of jobs. Are people looking at layoffs next week, or and job satisfaction. I mean, we have some incredible people that work for us that sought us out because they want to be part of the future too. They want to be part of something that's happening, not just a research project or a spreadsheet. They want to, we're making fuel every day, and every day people are coming in and buying it and excited
It's
that
remarkable.
they don't.
It's like a miracle.
I personally haven't been to a gas station on Maui since the year 2000. When people can say that, and I feel like that commercial, that retirement commercial about what's your number. As I feel like walking around with my number of the millions of pounds of carbon emissions I've saved, but what it comes down to is is it spreading to individuals. This is why we keep our retail pump on Maui, even though it's a very small portion of the fuel we sell. but we have about 250 maybe customers, and when people can come in on a daily basis, buy the fuel, and feel like here's something they can do, they're doing something about the problem on a daily basis. It doesn't hurt. Well, for them, it's cheaper, but it's it's a little bit more difficult because there's only one pump station on the island, but it's in central Maui, and they become part of the solution.
It's investing. And that was my next point about trying to reach people in the larger population. Investing is a big deal. These HUIs you talked about are a big deal. If I invest in something, I'm invested in more ways than just the money.
Right.
And if my friends and relatives see that I'm investing in something, they're gonna get in on it. And all of a sudden, it's personal. And the last point comes to mind is the Energy Policy Forum thing, where Carl Friedman in Maui is working on the report, the metrics. Okay, to me, the most important metric is how much money are we sending overseas. And if I had a big, red thermometer, and it showed that actually, instead of sending $6 billion overseas every year, we're keeping $6 billion. My God, you could buy a rail system for that. Or anything else.
Yeah.
You could fix the highways for that.
Yeah, and our kids have places to work. They don't have to leave home.
So, and you keep that money in the multiplier effect in the economy. So, I mean, it's huge. And people have got to be reminded of this all the time.
Yeah.
And you're doing a job at that. So what do you think for the future? Tell me 1 minute for the future on Pacific Biodiesel. Where are you going to fit?
1 minute.
What's going to happen with geothermal? Is it going to affect things?
Well, I hope it gets going. I mean, geothermal I think it's one of the great promises on Maui. There's so much potential and it hasn't been tapped. So we hope. I mean, we don't feel like we're necessarily competing with other forms of renewable energy. Probably our biggest competition is the large claims made by other companies, that haven't been proven. It's very frustrating. There's a lot of funding that we miss out on, and research money and grant money and even investment money, because people are running over to an idea that maybe won't be proven for 5 years, when we in the next 5 years we could be way beyond that if we had the money now. So that's our biggest frustration in the scheme of things, is that if we see other companies that are doing something real, like geothermal is real, wind is real, solar is real. But it also, the other part of that is it has to be done sustainably.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been great. It's always great.
Great talking with you, Jay. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.